back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it?
It does.
I'm going to walk all over you.
That's what they say when they come in till they get the first bills.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, we're talking about family law and going through the breakup, and a lot of people want to do that, walking all over the spouse to get the divorce. But I guess the bills that come in are kind of sobering, right? They make people snap out of it and decide it's time to really look at this seriously.
Well, it's interesting because unlike in other litigation, if I'm suing you, Zach, I'm taking your money from you or insurance money. Here you're fighting for your own money.
Right.
And so it gets to the point it's just not worth it for the person to do it. And some they want the aggressiveness. So when they say, I want you to really be aggressive, it's like, okay, well, here's what it's going to cost you to do what you want to do. And then they don't quite want as much aggressiveness. They'd rather, as Lee and I, try to figure out how to work out a deal so that they get, 85 or 90% of what
because the other parties incurring costs at the same rate.
Yes.
Exactly.
So then you're basically doubling.
Yeah.
So if you say it's going to be $15,000 or $20,000, and it's $20,000 or $30,000.
Exactly. I had a guy years ago, was someone I knew, and he said, I knew I had to, when I was getting divorced, I'd divide my assets with my wife. I didn't know I had to do with my lawyer as well. Mm-hmm. Because his was a really long litigation process.
Right.
So
but the bigger the amounts, the longer it takes. Is that typically the way it is? Or will some people who don't have a lot of money fight over the silliest things?
It can be both ways, unfortunately. But we try to, I definitely focus on the economic analysis of it. Like, for instance, we don't waste time fighting over possessions in a home because although they may have sentimental value to you, they don't have, a market value. So there's no point in paying a lawyer to fight over, dishes. It just doesn't make economic sense.
Well, who does fight over them?
Lots of people.
It's
no,
amazing.
what I'm saying, how do you resolve that? Mediation or?
Well, what I often do is...
Because if you're not, like you're saying, it's not worth it for me to do that at my rate per hour to add all up at the end of the day, but you still have to come to some kind of decision.
Yeah, so we can give people solutions and suggestions, like you literally have to go one by one and pick a possession as you go, but that's not something that you need legal advice for. It's just it's something we can assist with, but it comes down to common sense.
So you get a mediator involved or something?
You can. Of course, that ends up costing as well. So, what I tell a lot of my clients, like most people, not like, when I first started, they had one TV. Now they have two TVs. Pick one each. You have two couches. Pick one each. And see, the kid stuff stays with them,
But you get somebody who picks it just because they know the husband wants it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Didn't you have a Fluffy the cat story? Was it you? Or Sarah that had the cat was really called Fluffy?
No, that must have been Sarah. But we do see agreements about pets, especially because of pet costs. So often people will share custody of a pet and
so you
share
say
the cost.
we'll separate and divorce, but should the dog need any kind of expensive vet bill, you're going to pay half.
Yeah, you can agree. You can agree to that. It used to be that you didn't even mention the pets in there, but they're part of the family. And some of them, you're right, the cost of what they paid for the pet just to buy it a couple of years earlier, they want to make sure they figure out how to
get some boutique dog, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting because they're considered a chattel, but they're a live chattel. It's different.
Okay. Now, everything gets complicated when there's some kind of coercion or pressure or even violence, right? So when someone comes to you and then you go through that first consultation and you bring up, is there anybody, why are you here? Well, my husband or wife gets violent or what have you. So what do you do in those situations?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we're actually required to screen for family violence now under the new Family Law Act. And so we ask a series of questions to find out whether there's violence, but there's different types of violence. So it's not just physical violence. It can be emotional violence, financial violence. So controlling behavior and things like that are covered under that. And it can change the way the file can be resolved or litigated, because if there's a power imbalance between the two parties, it may not be appropriate to use, say, mediation, because they may not be able to be in the same room, for instance.
But is there when you have a physical violence case, is it incumbent on you to go to court and maybe get a restraining order or anything like that? Or how do you know when you have to ratchet it up? Because someone might have just had it too many times, and that's it. They're out of there, right? And so how do you know when it's somebody who's had a long history of being aggressive or they're really in danger?
Well, that's a tough one because, oddly enough, the increase in the risk of violence occurs at separation or if someone goes out and gets a restraining order. And, it sounds, counter to what the Act says, but my view has always been the restraining order will only stop someone who wouldn't have done anything in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so what we're supposed to look at is, whether or not we need a restraining order. I tell them often it's easier to get it through the Crown and a criminal matter because they can get no contact orders right off the bat and it's free.
So you call the police.
Exactly. When it comes to getting a restraining order afterwards, certainly there's nothing wrong with applying for that, and we do it in circumstances where it's necessary, but there may already be a no contact from the criminal side. The more difficult one and the more tough ones to deal with are the emotional abuse and the constant contacting, because the physical often ends up with the police being involved.
Or they can go and stay with a relative and just get away from the situation.
Exactly. Right? What we really have to screen for a lot of these is the emotional and the financial as to whether or not someone is going to agree to something simply because the other one's been dominant over the relationship. And every relationship has, to some extent, this power imbalance in certain things. But does it get to the point that the person, even with appropriate legal advice, could not settle it? If so, then we should go to court.
Leah?
Yeah, I agree with that. So I've seen often that basically 25 years, 30 years of that power imbalance is just too much for the person to overcome and sort of advocate for themselves or even have their lawyer give me the instructions to do what I think is appropriate. So often the best course is to go to court. You
must see families, the wife or the husband, once the children get to a certain age where they've stayed together and then they pull the pin. What is the age typically where they say the kids are old enough to accept this, or the kids often know long before the parents act that mom and dad don't get along?
Yeah.
What is it, 16, 18?
Actually, sometimes I find it's actually harder on the kids when they're, in my cases, when they're a little older. Because they seem to be used more as a sounding board and get more dragged into it. And then, of course,
because they're more mature.
Exactly. Right. Where do you want to live? That kind of stuff. Whereas when they're really young, it's like, it is what it is. I don't think there's any age that they separate as a result. When it comes to some of the violence cases, I find they separate when they're afraid that the violence is going to be transferred to the children. Mm-hmm. A lot of spouses, and in the vast majority be the women, the wives, they accept the violence is part of it because they need it for economic reasons. They don't like it, but it's part of what they've had to put up with. When it is a possibility of going to the children, that's when they say, okay, I'm pulling the plug and that's it.
Is there a length of marriage that you see as common? Like, have you gone through and ever grafted out?
all over the place.
Married for...
We see 2 months and we see...
2 months?
35 years.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I've seen them all over the place.
2 months. So do you say, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Why did you get married?
It's becoming more common.
It was a Vegas drunken weekend.
No,
maybe.
you know what we're seeing is long-term relationships, common law relationships.
Right.
And they often will get married and then...
Because the parents say, you should get married.
Perhaps they think it will improve the relationship, and then the relationship, after they've done it, they realize, oh, never mind, it didn't fix our problems.
Away from the person, yeah.
Yeah.
And you see that also with children. We're not getting along, so let's have a kid.
Yeah.
And we're not getting along, so let's have another one.
Yeah, it never helps.
Yeah. You must have times where you just scratch your head and go, what part of common sense came in here?
Sometimes I wish I could sit down because that's a really good question at length and go through the history of my files, but we have too much other work to do it. But that would be a good thing to look at because I think divorces go all over the place.
They do.
It seems for me, just in a general sense, often they're in their mid-40s. And then they've been married for 15, 20 years and they've grown apart. And because apparently the age group where the second most amount of people get married after the 20s is the 50s. Mm-hmm. It's the second marriage.
And do you see any common threads as to why people want to break up? Is it they just drive me crazy, or what is somebody? Is it money? What is it?
Well, combination of things. I think for me, it's people get divorced when they have no money because they fight over the money, and when they have a lot of money, they can get divorced because they can afford it. Children causes stresses and everything. And especially I find that some people, the kids are so structured in everything they're at like 5 different activities. They're always running to an activity. They're not together. Or I used to act in the past for quite a few longshoremen, and they worked the nights. They were never together. So, of course, over years, they just
Some would say
apart.
that's a perfect marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
He's never home.
Yeah, it can be in some cases, I think. But
I travel a lot. My wife and I get along great, but we always joke that that's why it works. Is I'm gone half the time.
You can't fight. You're not together. Exactly.
So there any common threads that you see? Nothing really. Is every case different?
Yeah,
or?
probably lack of communication between the parties. They just stopped talking over the time, and that was the end of it. And there can be a lot of reasons why that happened, but that seems to be a general sense.
Yeah, I would agree that there's reasons that cause the fights, so money, children, but the reality is what do you do with the fights? How do you deal with those? Do you communicate? Do you work towards it, or do you just give up? And then those are the people that end up separating. And
what do you think the time is between when somebody is thinking of getting separated or divorced to when they actually act on it? Do you think it's years, or is it months, or is it because some people are living in relationships that they haven't been happy in for a long time?
I would say years.
Yeah, it's been, it can be a couple of years. And what I find the interesting one is someone comes in and they want the separation. They've already made it mentally in their mind that they want it. The other spouse may not have thought there's a problem, and then they're kind of shocked.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. That was my next question is what's the percentage of people where the partner has no clue? Yeah, they're clueless and don't see it coming, or do most people see it coming?
It can be up to like 15 to 20% sometimes where they just don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But most people see it coming.
Most people know.
Yeah. Most have made a decision.
They may not agree. So there's often one party that wants to proceed and the other party wants to work on reconciliation. But the vast majority of people know that it's coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that.
There's probably a few people with the radio turned up like now go, mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm living that.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because I think in my experience, the husbands and the guys, they will decide to separate more on not a whim, but on they make a quick decision. Whereas the wives have, when they've come in to see me, they've mentally checked out maybe 6 to 8 months earlier, and it was just we'll see if we can work it out. Whereas the husband he gets mad at her for something and they'll separate.
What's the percentage? There's another person involved. There's a third person in the middle of the marriage. Is that quite common?
They often don't tell us right away, or at all. So we may not know. But
because that's what the man. I was going to say the man making a quick want a divorce is maybe because he's met somebody new.
It can be, but the question is, did he meet someone new because the other wasn't working out in the first place? And so, it's a tough one. In terms of someone new, a lot of them have someone, by the time they've come to see us, they're dating someone new, but they may have been separated in the same house or something.
Leah, you were going to finish a thought there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think often it isn't necessarily the other person is the reason, but it gives people an impetus to take that next step often.
It's more like a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've heard studies that say that people go into another relationship to get caught so that they can, like they really do want to get caught fooling around on their spouse just so they can get everything moving along. They don't know how to do it, so that's one way to do it.
Wouldn't shock me, like the guy who buys new girlfriend a $10,000 bracelet on his MasterCard and figures wife's not going to see it. It's like, seriously? Seriously?
And you owe her that money, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, when we come back, we're going to actually get some sort of questions, different situations, things that have happened out there, and get your opinion on them. We're talking about family law, and we have with us today David Halkett, partner at McQuarrieHunter, and Leah Donaldson, associate. And Sarah is with you there. You're the specialist, not the specialist, I should say, in family law at McQuarrieHunter. We'll continue our conversation next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.